from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the antitrust drumbeat continues. Apple in the hot seat on the Hill. Lawmakers also have their sights set on Amazon, Facebook, Google. And there's a new sheriff in town. Lina Khan voted to take the reins of the FTC. More on what it all means. Plus, payments juggernaut Stripe helped power a wave of commerce coming online through the pandemic. The company is now approaching a $100 billion valuation, and it's not even public. We'll talk to Stripe co-founder and president John Collison in an exclusive interview. And solving the many problems in healthcare. The startup Solve connects patients with providers to land telehealth and in-person medical appointments. Is it the future of urgent care or all kinds of care? We're going to hear from co-founder and CEO Heather Fernandez. All those stories in a moment, but first, U.S. stocks snapping a three-day rally. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta has all the details. Kriti, take it away.
Well, Emily, it is all about the Fed when it comes to the stock market. And you saw that kind of manifest itself in a really interesting way yesterday and today. Really yesterday, it being kind of a defensive positioning where you did see tech outperform. You can see that kind of rise right up there. And then today, sell everything. That was kind of the message. Pretty traditional when you are going into an FOMC meeting like we are tomorrow. So we'll really have to see what comes out of that going into, like I said, what Chairman Powell says. I do want to bring to your attention the volatility picture, though, because we've been talking about a low volatility environment. But for tech, it's taking just a little bit longer. The most recent slide coming just a little bit more quickly, but we are still above a 20 gauge on the VXN. So really, when we're talking about the volatility for those tech stocks, still not really as calm as perhaps the broader market is. And lastly, we do have to mention here that tech is getting another bid. I just showed you the two-day chart, but if you're looking at the month of June, for example, I mean, we're looking at a different chart here, but hey, I can talk to this one too. U.S. unemployment, very crucial when we're talking about the Fed. But I should mention this has everything to do with tech shares as well, because hey, some of the labor story, that relates not just to tech, but to the broader market as well. We're going to hear a lot of that from Chairman Powell. And if you start to see some defensive positioning tomorrow, especially when it comes to the labor market, something Chairman Powell has been very emphasizing about, that's going to show up in whether tech gets the bid or not. So that's the macro picture. Ed, what are you looking at?
Yeah, these are the three stocks I'm looking at. Let's get straight to DraftKings. The stock falling by as much as 12% on Tuesday. Biggest drop since March after Hindenburg Research said it was short the stock. Remember, as a short seller, it's set to gain from any drop in the stock. Part of the short sellers report was about SB Tech, that tech subsidiary of DraftKings. It was one of the parties in the deal for DraftKings to go public, you'll remember. In response, DraftKings saying that it did conduct a thorough review of SB Tech's business practices and that it was, quote, comfortable with the findings. If we bring up that chart, you can see that actually after that 12% drop, it paired some of that loss throughout Tuesday's session. The next stock that I'm looking at, if we cycle up the boards quickly, is Lordstown, popping as much as 15% after executives said the company did in fact have enough cash to start production in September all the way through to May of next year. Remember, this is a company that lost both its CEO and CFO on Monday. Last week, it did a regulatory filing saying it didn't have enough cash to get its product to market and could go bankrupt. How quickly that story has changed. Executives out in force at an event in Detroit today trying to steady the ship after those management changes. And finally, bring up Amazon. Really interesting report from JP Morgan that said Amazon could overtake Walmart as the US biggest retailer as soon as next year. Of course, Amazon has a lot of strings to its bow. It has its AWS cloud business, of course, along with entertainment with Amazon Prime and Prime Video. But lots of growth coming from the pandemic. Part of JP Morgan's study saying that the pandemic has pulled forward 3 years worth of e-commerce growth, and Amazon is set to benefit. Okay, the stock's not done much today. Walmart was higher, Amazon was a little bit lower. But look at how they've moved in lockstep so far year to date until recently, where there's the divergence and outperformance by Amazon. Emily.
All right, Ed, Kriti, thanks so much. Meantime, big day on Capitol Hill. In Washington, Apple back on the Hill as government officials raise questions about the company's privacy practices. The iPhone maker is again facing scrutiny over compliance with Trump-era subpoenas, which requested information on more than 100 lawmakers. Apple ultimately turned over that data to the Justice Department under gag order, highlighting the bind tech companies face when summoned by law enforcement. And in more regulatory news, the House Antitrust Subcommittee unveiled a slew of new bills aimed at curbing tech's power over the last week. Amazon, Facebook, Google, along with Apple, all of them targets. The legislation would limit the power of big tech and aim to ensure more competition in the marketplace. As criticism of big tech mounts, the Senate has just confirmed a new member to the top ranks of U.S. antitrust enforcement, and that is Lina Khan, a vocal critic of big tech who will serve as chair of the FTC, giving Democrats the majority of the 5-member agency. In a tweet, she writes, Congress created the FTC to safeguard fair competition and protect consumers, workers, and honest businesses from unfair and deceptive practices. I look forward to upholding this mission with vigor and serving the American public. Joining me now for more to wrap it all up, our Bloomberg News Washington reporter Anna Edgerton. So obviously, Lina Khan, a big addition to the FTC. What does her appointment mean?
Well, not only was she confirmed by the Senate today, which we expected, but she was also appointed by Biden to be the chair of the FTC. So this really shows you the direction that the Biden administration wants to take antitrust enforcement, and that is much more seriously. You know, this is something that tech companies are going to see with a very wary eye, especially since Lina Khan really made her mark with her paper titled The Amazon's Antitrust Paradox. You know, this is something that has definitely been a hallmark of her career so far and something that we will expect to see more of in her career at the FTC.
I talked to famed antitrust and big tech professor Mark Lendley of Stanford earlier today, and take a listen to what he had to say about her appointment.
Well, I think that's definitely a further signal that the tech industries are in for some rough sledding on the antitrust front. Commissioner Khan is someone who's been quite vocal in her desire to rein in big tech, with an early focus on Amazon, but also a discussion of this idea of platforms and structural separation between the platform aspects and other aspects of a company's business. So I think she's going to be someone who pushes for aggressive antitrust enforcement in this industry.
So rough sledding ahead for big tech. How does this change the center of gravity when it comes to big tech antitrust in Washington, Anna?
Well, and that's a great question, because it's not just the appointment of Lina Khan. It's also some of the legislation that we're seeing introduced, which would take very serious actions that could have serious consequences for big technology companies, one of which would be not allowing companies to have their own products. So if that were true, then, you know, Google Maps wouldn't be able to operate on Google devices, and, you know, Amazon wouldn't be able to sell its own products on the Amazon website. So this would mean serious changes for technology companies. And, you know, although it's kind of an uphill battle to pass legislation these days, it's really hard to round up the votes needed in the Senate. One thing that's remarkable about this is that we're seeing bipartisan support for stronger antitrust enforcement. And it's really interesting to see how the action on Capitol Hill is going to interact with the action in the agencies being led by someone like Lina Khan.
All right, Anna Edgerton for us in Washington. Of course, a story we're going to continue to follow. In more news surrounding big tech regulation, I spoke to California Representative Ro Khanna, who outlined his concerns around antitrust and explained why he thinks Facebook should be broken up. Take a listen.
I think a lot of the tech companies want regulation. They don't want to be making the decisions about what to take down and what to leave up. But you're absolutely right. The Democrats say, well, how can you keep some of that content up on these sites? It's inflaming hate. It's inflaming violence. The conservatives often say, no, don't take anything down. And so these tech companies are getting mixed signals. What we need to do is put the politics aside, make sure we can have some basic guidelines for what type of content should be removed and what type of regulations could be effective. And until we do that, I think you're still going to have the internet be the Wild West, where Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg get to decide the rules. I don't think that's how we ought to operate.
Now, you're also an attorney by background, and I'm so curious how you're watching some of these lawsuits against big tech. The DOJ is suing Google, the FTC suing Facebook, Apple versus Epic, Amazon under fire for how it treats its sellers. From a legal perspective, what are you watching in terms of outcomes and process here?
I think what we need to do is have the facts play out. But one of the questions should be, are these platforms open to all sellers, or are they overcharging the price of commissions to be able to sell? Another question is, are they engaged in exclusive agreements with each other that are keeping out a Bing or a Yahoo or a GoGoDuck? One other thing to look at is, have they engaged in acquisitions with the purpose of squelching competition and alternate platforms to arise? My guess is that there are probably antitrust violations in these companies that have to be rectified, and they should rectify them. But that doesn't mean that you take a sledgehammer and just say, let's break up all of tech. It means recognize what they're doing well, regulate them, and then let's move forward with a more competitive marketplace, as we did so well in the case of Microsoft.
Do you see reason to break up some of tech?
I do. I mean, I would probably unwind Facebook from Instagram and WhatsApp. It seems to me we'd be better off if there were multiple platforms. So that's an example off the top of my head. I'm sure there are other places where we could unwind things. Of course, it's much harder to unwind than it is to prevent that merger in the first place. So I do think we have to have more scrutiny in these kind of mergers that consolidate tech marketplace.
Facebook would argue, how can you unwind a merger that happened a decade ago? What is the legal argument there?
Well, it's hard. I mean, that's why I don't think that merger should have been approved in the first place. But the argument is that there really aren't enough robust competitive forums, and that we want to have a competitive forum to social media, and having Instagram and WhatsApp have separate entities would create more of that competition in that space. And there is precedent, as you know, for breaking things up with AT&T, with Standard Oil. It's an extraordinary remedy, but where you don't have any real competition, I think it's worth considering. But Facebook's right. It's much harder to do with. The data has been interconnected. If you break it up, you have questions of privacy. You have a question of what about integrated teams? So the ideal solution is not to have approved those mergers in the first place. One final nuance on that, that's a tough call, because a lot of times it's not clear when those acquisitions take place that a company is truly going to be a competitor. And that's why these are very contextual and difficult decisions.
California Representative Ro Khanna there. That's part of a lengthy sit-down we did together. You'll see more of that right here in coming weeks. Meantime, Presidents Biden and Putin are set to meet in Geneva Wednesday. Cybersecurity is one of the many topics expected to be discussed during that meeting that, according to the White House, could last 4 to 5 hours. Also on the agenda, the renewal of the new START nuclear arms pact, set to expire in 2026. Stay with us for all the developments as it happens. Coming up, a new media property is launching in Silicon Valley, taking direct aim at traditional outlets. We're going to be speaking with Andreessen Horowitz operating partner Margaret Wemmakers next. This is Bloomberg. The venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz is venturing into a new area, publishing. The company has launched a new media website called Future that's aimed at tech industry insiders. It'll feature a mix of analysts and opinion from its partners, staff writers, and outside experts. Andreessen Horowitz says Future is not a news outlet, but will compete directly with news organizations for your time and attention. Joining us now to discuss operating partner marketing and Future Representative Margaret Wemmakers. Margaret, great to have you on the show. So why are you doing this? What are you hoping to achieve?
Well, we have, as you know, we've long been known for creating content, and anecdotally and by measurement, it seems like there's big demand for this kind of information. And actually, would dispute, yes, we are competing with media for attention, but we will actually cover topics and areas that I don't think get much attention from traditional media. So I think there's a lot of white space, and it's probably a little wonkier and more wide-ranging and more in-depth than the sort of the TikTok of what's happening in the daily news that you do extremely well. And I wouldn't want to compete with you on that, not ever.
So A mix of opinion and analysis on the site today. I saw Stripes, Patrick Collison, his brother is going to be on the show a bit later. John, Ryan Peterson of Flexport wrote something. Do you see this as replacing or just complementing traditional media?
I see it as a complement to traditional media because there's important news coverage that has to happen all the time that we are not really well suited to do. What we are using the asset that we have is we have a lot of in-house experts who have firsthand information because they have lived, open source business models, or take whatever topic you have, and they have access to fellow colleagues, fellow travelers who also have that. And we want to surface that. We're less interested in, all the stuff that you have been covering. I've been watching the segment up until now, and like none of those topics would be on Future.
Now, you and I have talked about this a lot over the years as your thinking has evolved. Our audience hasn't necessarily been privy to it, but, many journalists know that some folks at Andreessen Horowitz aren't fond of traditional media and traditional journalists. And some of them are asking, why the dislike? What is traditional media doing wrong or getting wrong, in your view?
I think media is getting a lot right, for sure. I do think there was sort of a pendulum, which I also disagreed with in the early on. It's like, oh my God, there's another unicorn. Now we have a decacorn. Like people were writing about valuations, which I thought was sort of meaningless. And then the pendulum has swung all the way back to a lot of questions are in the vein of, when did you stop beating your wife? And if you think about the possible answers, there's no good one. So that has changed a little bit, but that's not why we're doing Future. We are doing Future because we think that there's a need for the tech curious, for the folks who are participants, who are fellow builders, whether they are in old style industries or in new industries or our entrepreneurs, to figure out like the future and how to build it and how technology will help advance it.
So I have to challenge that a little bit because, I know, most journalists, in my view, are trying to do their jobs. They're not asking about wife beating. They're asking legitimate questions that should be answered. Why does it seem to you that the pendulum is swung too far in the wrong direction?
Why? I mean, there's lots of off the record reasons that I could speculate, but I shouldn't speculate. I think it just has, and I think partly that's sort of human nature, and people have gotten wary of the technology celebration, and that's their prerogative. I'm trying to accomplish a business goal, right? Our firm wants to advance the future and thinks that technology is a good force in the world. No problem. And sorry, I think Siri just talked to me. And
we can still hear you.
Good. By implication, we think that hopefully that will make us attractive to entrepreneurs. And that's what our business is all about. As long as, the three things that matter in venture capital is seeing the deals, picking the deals, and very importantly, winning the deals. If my function can help us see the deals, then I'm making a contribution to advancing the future. Sorry. So
you're still on the show today, and it's a pleasure to have you. Do you still see value in traditional media? Do you still see value in Andreessen Horowitz, in your partners doing interviews in your portfolio companies, choosing between, let's say, a Bloomberg or the New York Times or Future?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there is a bit of a misconception. So let me say for the record, in the early days of building the Andreessen Horowitz brand, we did a lot of press work on behalf of the firm. Right now, most of the media stuff that we do is in service of the portfolio. Because the one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to be the place where we jump the shark and all we do is talk about ourselves. And I thought like I was heading that way. So I think we made a correction that has been useful. And we've also have now a huge portfolio. So there are lots and lots of companies that are like, hey, we are trying to get a profile in publication X. Will you help us? Which we want to support all day long. And we do that quite a bit.
So then do you see, in big picture, do you still see value in an independent press covering Silicon Valley? And how?
Yeah, absolutely, there's value in independent press. Also, I'm not in charge. This question sort of makes it sound like I can make this decision. I don't get to make that decision. And of course, there's value in independent media. And by the way, my firm, I have several folks in the firm who are my personal news service. They send me stories all day long. We consume more media than I think many, many, many organizations. So we're voracious readers and listeners and watchers of lots and lots of media. It's obviously an important function.
Well, thanks for watching and joining us to share your story. I know you're hiring at Future, and of course, it's live now, so you can check it out. Margaret Wemmakers of Andreessen Horowitz. Thanks so much, Margaret, for stopping by. All right, coming up, Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, making a very public statement about the wealth gap and what she's doing about it. We'll find out what she had to say next. And Oracle down in extended trading after sales in its cloud business fell short of investor expectations. The company has been focusing on boosting revenue in that area, but continues to lag behind Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet. This is Bloomberg. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has told Bloomberg that she doesn't have a specific timeline to complete a security review of TikTok and WeChat. Last week, President Biden ordered the Commerce Department to review the Chinese-owned apps after revoking Trump-era bans on them. Secretary Raimondo spoke with my colleague David Weston from Belgium on the sidelines of the U.S.-EU summit. And in a wide-ranging interview, she spoke about the need for the U.S. and Europe to work together on common goals in the tech industry.
If you think about technology and the digital economy, massive job creation will occur in the EU and America in the coming years in the digital economy. If it's incumbent upon America and the EU, which have shared values, to set the rules of the road. And we certainly don't want countries like China setting the rules of the road.
Meantime, Shopify will open up its e-commerce checkout system to all retailers selling through Google and Facebook. That expands a relationship the Canadian company has with the two tech giants, and it marks the first time Shopify has offered a product to merchants that don't use its platform. And billionaire philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, formerly Mackenzie Bezos, has given away $2.7 billion to a variety of charities. Since last July, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife has donated $8.5 billion. She's worth almost $60 billion. In a blog post, she wrote that it would be better if wealth were not concentrated in a small number of hands. Coming up, payment processor Stripe, now valued at $95 billion, but the company is still private. We're going to talk about what's ahead, what's going on with growth, products, and the future in an exclusive interview with Stripe co-founder and president John Collison. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
I think crypto is the next internet-sized opportunity for the United States. I think it has the potential to create as many, if not more, jobs in the internet, similar with economic growth. I think it has the potential to square the circle on the privacy internet issues that we've been talking about with big tech companies for the last 10 years.
That's just part of my conversation with Coinbase co-founder, also the co-founder and managing partner of Paradigm, Fred Ursum. You can catch the full episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 this Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Wall Street time, 6:30 p.m. San Francisco time, and Thursday across all Bloomberg regions. Meantime, digital payments giant Stripe is set to kick off their upcoming conference, Stripe Sessions, Wednesday, with keynotes showcasing the latest products and features and a $95 billion valuation to date. The big question, of course, remains, when will Stripe go public and what is the next phase of growth? Joining me now in an exclusive interview on what's ahead for the company, Stripe co-founder and president John Collison. John, it's been a while. Great to have you back. I want to talk about how Stripe fared in the pandemic, because such a massive amount of business came online and Stripe was powering a lot of that. And then there was a lot of business that didn't happen because of the pandemic. What are the trends that you saw through the pandemic on Stripe?
Yeah, it was obviously a very interesting and serious time. On the business side, I would say we saw two really interesting trends. One is it was clearly very disruptive for small businesses, and depending on kind of which sector people were in, the impact was felt differently. But I think, the big advantage that small businesses have over large businesses is they can turn on a dime and they can really change things. And so we saw that with a lot of the small businesses on Stripe, where if you needed to completely reorient yourself to trade online. We saw this with Roll Bicycles in Ohio, with Jane Russell's Handmade Sausages in Ireland, where they lost half their sales overnight, but were able to retool to go online. And so I think we saw the structural advantages that small businesses have in the form of agility actually start to play out. And if you look at the numbers, we actually saw a higher rate of new business creation during the pandemic than we had seen previously. And so that number actually ticked up. And then we also saw on the large and kind of traditional enterprise side, many more large companies retooling themselves for digital stuff than we had seen previously. And so you can imagine, say you're working at a large established company, a grocery retailer or something like this, and you've been banging the drum internally for many years that, hey, we need to take our digital ordering seriously or something like this. This was the year where they finally got those projects out and really saw massive growth of them. And so this is actually something that's somewhat newer for Stripe. We obviously got our start with startups, but we're now working with a lot of traditional enterprises. Think of Waitrose in the UK or Harris Teeter here, or companies like that, to help them launch their brand new digital offerings.
So your big virtual conference, Stripe Sessions, is coming up. What is the next phase of growth as the world reopens? What does that look like?
Well, one thing that's interesting to us is we think of the pandemic as a time when everything moved to completely digital, right? All commerce was e-commerce or something like that. If you look at the raw numbers, it was a massive bump. It was an acceleration of multiple years. But if you actually just look at the raw numbers for a second, you see retail sales in the United States moved from 11% to 14% online. But we're still talking about penetrations in the teens overall. So the big thing that we're focused on, and we have talked about this before, Emily, is the fact that there is still so much room to grow ahead. And I find that quite exciting, in that if you're thinking about starting an e-commerce company today, I think it's actually a fabulous time to do so, because retail is still only 14% online penetration in the United States, yet there's been so much habit forming that's taken place over the past, say, 2 years. The other thing that we're really excited about is Stripe continues to branch out and broaden the set of products that we're building on behalf of our users. So we try to take an extremely user-first approach in the products that we built. We now have the benefit of the millions of businesses on Stripe. In fact, we had 2 million businesses join Stripe since the start of 2020. We can just go ask them. We don't have to overcomplicate it. We don't have to be too smart about what we're building. We can just go ask them what is causing them friction, what would make their life easier. And so you saw 2 big new launches in the lead up to Stripe Sessions. Stripe Tax, which handles sales tax and VAT for businesses. This is something that's incredibly complex, big lift, not something that any business owner enjoys spending time on. And then Stripe Identity, where, as you're probably familiar with, all sorts of different businesses need to do some kind of identity verification, and Stripe Identity makes it simple for them to do it.
Right, and obviously that is so important as we continue to see these cyber attacks on the rise. Speaking of users, back in 2018, you stopped processing Bitcoin payments, saying that not enough people were interested in doing them. And now, we've seen more institutional adoption and obviously a lot of individual investors buying in. Has your thinking evolved on crypto?
Well, I think our thinking on crypto has always been fairly nuanced. And to be clear, we are extraordinarily enthusiastic Bitcoin fans, in that if you think of the kind of world that crypto people and we are trying to bring about, I think it's a very related set of goals. And so one thing we're really hung up on is 22% of commerce today is cross-border. That's it. It feels like it should be much higher, especially on the internet, where it's so easy to have cross-border interactions. But yet we're stuck down at this level where only 1/5 of interactions are cross-border, and it's actually very hard to have any kind of meaningful cross-border interaction. And so crypto is one very very exciting direction for trying to solve that. But also, the kind of stuff Stripe is doing, where we're making it really easy to handle non-US payment methods or kind of non-locally based payment methods like Alipay or GrabPay or something like this, is another approach. And I think we should pursue all approaches and see what works. We should be pursuing them in parallel. On Bitcoin in particular, I think rightly it gets a lot of angst in the crypto community, the fact that transaction fees on both Bitcoin and Ethereum, the two main cryptocurrencies, are still too high. And so there's all manner of interesting kind of work going on solving that between the Lightning Network and some of the Solana and some of the new chains and Stellar and things like that. And so we'll see what works. But is this a problem that needs solving? The fact that it's still way too hard to have a cross-border interaction, and the fact that people in long tail of countries are still so underserved? Absolutely, it's a problem. And we're picking kind of another approach to solve that. I mean, this is why we acquired Paystack, quite recently. Africa broadly has been really underserved for a long time when it comes to digital commerce infrastructure. And again, we're taking our approach towards solving that.
So Stripe recently raised another massive round of funding, your valuation approaching $100 billion. Maybe it's beyond that, and we don't know yet. The Wall Street Journal just published a story that there's a ton of investor interest. Is the next step being a public company?
Yeah, look, it's a cliche, and I feel like this happens every time we come on the show, but we still have no plans to IPO, and we're just very hung up on that long-term opportunity. There's lots of fun stuff for us to do there. We just had two big major new product categories that we opened up here, and so we're having lots of fun building Stripe. There's a massive opportunity in front of us, and look, maybe we do, maybe we don't someday, but right now we have no plans.
All right. Now, you made some disruptive moves in remote work, giving workers a $20,000 bonus if they left high-cost cities like New York, like San Francisco, but also accepted a 10% pay cut. I'm curious how many employees took you up on that and how that's changing the distribution of your workforce.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number to that question off the top of my head. We saw a pretty major uptake where I think there were a lot of people where they took advantage of all the remote working that was going on last year to be able to move to be closer to their families, to somewhere they wanted to move previously. And so the way we think about Stripe is, I think we have not come to our ultimate stance or ultimate decision on what the exact mix of in-office versus remote will be. Because I think that's very hard to make a decision on right now. And in particular, there's a huge confounder of everyone has been working remotely during a pandemic, but I think that's going to be very different to the steady state working remotely. What we do know is that Stripe is a very global company. We're dual headquartered across San Francisco and Dublin, and that's very important given our Irish roots and given how much of our business we do in Europe and how quickly that has been growing. And so we know we're going to be kind of multi-homed, and we'll have multiple hubs over time. And we're also going to have a very large remote population. We've always done a lot of remote hiring within the North America time zone. Actually, during the past year and a half, we opened up remote hiring in Europe. And so I think it's clearly going to be a mix. What the exact composition of those will be, it's kind of hard to say right now.
All right. John Carlson, thanks for giving us a view of the present and the future. Stripe co-founder and president. Good to have you here. Okay. Coming up, telehealth has seen a boom amidst the pandemic, and Solve Health is riding that wave. Co-founder and CEO Heather Fernandez joins us next to talk about how medical care will look different in a post-pandemic world. This is Bloomberg. The pandemic has significantly changed how people interact with the healthcare system, creating a need to reduce non-urgent in-person contact. That is why the startup Solve Health is building a national online marketplace to connect patients with providers. The company has seen a spike in demand since March 2020, booking more than 1.5 million telemedicine appointments compared to 9,000 before the pandemic started. For more, we're joined now by Solve co-founder and CEO Heather Fernandez, who is our first in-person studio guest post-pandemic. So thank you so much for joining us.
I am trying to control my enthusiasm being in person. I'm very happy to be your first in-person guest.
It's good to see someone in person. So we've all had that moment where we've needed healthcare, our kids needed healthcare immediately, but we couldn't get an appointment with our doctor. And that is the problem that Solve is trying to solve, if
Absolutely.
you will. Talk to us about that problem. It is a huge problem. What is the solution?
It's such a good question, Emily. You know, our fundamental belief is that everyone deserves to be free of the friction and stress associated with everyday healthcare, right? Solving those three questions: where should I go for the problem I have? When can I be seen? And how much will it cost me? And you think about every other industry, right? Marketplaces have been created to connect riders and drivers, to connect buyers and sellers. And yet we don't have a similar model in healthcare. And that's what we're building, right? Those three questions for the consumers. And then on the supply side, our approach is to unlock the capacity that exists across the country through software. One quick stat that I'm proud of: 100 million Americans are within 5 miles of a bookable same-day appointment on Solve today across the country.
So how is this different than Carbon Health or One Medical?
I love Carbon Health and One Medical. Those approaches are rebuilding healthcare from the ground up. Let me build a new facility. Let me hire more doctors. Let me put a new footprint in this new geography. Our approach is hospital systems, providers, urgent care clinics across the country have capacity today. And we're going to use the software-first approach to unlock that capacity so that we can get to effectively 100% of the United States in the next few years.
So you're basically trying to get all clinics, all doctors in the U.S. online?
We focus very much on everyday healthcare needs, right? Traditionally, every healthcare need is treated the same way, whether it's my son's rash, even though he's entirely healthy, or my mom's COPD, who she's wonderful, but has a few more things that she's managing. That's just no longer necessary. So we're focused on the everyday healthcare use case, whether that's urgent care, primary care, women's health, ultimately mental health, and more of what we need in order to stay healthy.
Now, through the pandemic, you've offered COVID testing appointments, COVID vaccine appointments. How has COVID changed your business?
Yeah. Interestingly, we built for what we thought was the future of healthcare, and COVID in many ways accelerated all of that for us and really pulled in our roadmap. There were three really acceleration points for us. First was telemedicine, as you mentioned in your intro. We went from basically an inconsequential number of telemedicine visits to 1.2, 1.3 million just in 2020 alone. The second was COVID testing. As I look at our national footprint, that meant 100 million Americans could get a test if and when they needed it. We did something like 5 million total tests, second only to CVS. And now the CDC reports 40% of Americans avoided healthcare during COVID, and we are well positioned to help them get back on track.
So obviously there's going to be a lot more telehealth going forward, but how else do you think the healthcare system is going to be changed for good? For example, will we care who our doctors are, or just about getting seen?
Back to the point I was making on not all healthcare instances are the same. There are certain ones, back to my mom, who I love very much, and her COPD and her pulmonologist. That is a relationship that is important with the longevity of care. There are many things in our everyday healthcare as we think about our care continuum where access and convenience and an on-demand access via my phone is much, much more important. And that is here to stay. Digitization, access real time for consumers when they need it is absolutely here to stay.
Benchmark's Bill Gurley was one of your earliest backers, and we know he cares about scale.
Yes.
How big do you think this can be, and how do you get there?
Ultimately, we want to build a national network of everyday healthcare for all of Americans, right? When you think about today, 50% of working America is paying thousands of dollars out of pocket for the healthcare expenses for themselves and their family. And they're doing that without any tools to decide where should I go and how much should I cost. That is a problem, right? I think we should be the everyday healthcare entry point for every American.
So one of the things that's interesting about Solve is that it's an almost entirely COVID native startup in that your exponential growth all happened during the pandemic. And I wonder how much that has changed the business you thought you would be running at this moment in time to the business you are running, right? You know,
yes.
Your real estate expectations, for example, your talent expectations.
Yes. We are a COVID native startup in many ways. I don't really think about ourselves that way, but we've more than doubled in size and significantly grown scale and revenue in that time. And I think a couple of things. One is we are able to take advantage of the best of the future without really being anchored to the past. Everything that we do exists in the cloud. Slack is how we communicate. We've built in rituals to meet the next 50% of our company because we aren't in the same geography and haven't been able to meet them in person. At the same time, I think there is something magical about being in person like you and I are sitting here today. And so we're just really appreciative that we have the kind of organization where we can be flexible to both do the in-person things when necessary, as well as scale our team in particular without the real geographic constraints that we've had historically.
And didn't you get rid of your real estate and you're looking for are you gonna get an office? I mean.
We are. Today, we are basically a third roughly in the Bay Area, a third in Denver, which is another hub, and then a third distributed. I expect that it'll continue to grow in that way. We are currently an officeless population. That was helpful overall because we really didn't need the space. I look forward to having a place to collaborate, to have the energy to work through the difficult or chunky items that you have on your list, and at the same time to enable people the flexibility to live the lives that they want to live outside of the office.
All right. Solve co-founder and CEO Heather Fernandez, good to have you here in person. Thank you for braving the Bloomberg offices in the real world to come back to the studio. It's nice to have you.
Thank you so much.
All right, coming up, vacations far from paradise, how Airbnb is making nightmare trips disappear with settlements and hush money, and why you never hear about these crime-ridden journeys. That's next. And let's take a look at some of the video game makers of the day. Activision Blizzard, Electronic Arts, Take-Two Interactive, all in the red. Meantime, it was Nintendo's turn to take center stage at this year's all-virtual E3 event, announcing its new Zelda game called Breath of the Wild 2. It'll be out next year. This is Bloomberg. Airbnb has grown from a funky couch surfing alternative to one of the biggest travel companies in the world. It has more listings than the top 9 hotel chains combined and a $100 billion market value built on the idea that strangers can trust each other. But with so many people and so many transactions, many of which include meeting in real life, it is inevitable that bad things will sometimes happen. Every personality conflict, payment dispute, or unwanted advance between hosts and guests must be mediated. But serious crimes, however rare they are treated very differently. To explain, we are joined by Bloomberg Tech's Olivia Carville. Olivia, epic piece you have out today in Bloomberg Business Week. Talk to us about the starting point for this and what you found.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Emily. The real starting point of this story was actually a mass shooting that happened in Orinda in 2019 over Halloween. This case reached the media headlines. 5 people were killed in this mass shooting. And in the wake of it, Airbnb announced a huge raft of changes and updates to their safety policies. And that made me think, what happened inside the company during those conversations? Imagine if I'd been able to be a fly on the wall. What were we hearing around potential liability or what the company should do when violent crimes occur inside its listings? And that's what really got the ball rolling on me trying to take a deep dive into trust and safety inside Airbnb and how the company responds when things go really badly wrong on its platform.
You and I have talked to Brian Chesky many times, and many times over the last year specifically, and he talks about safety being a priority, cracking down on party houses. I want to take a quick listen to what he has had to say on this topic.
We've banned stays with parties for more than 16 people. We instituted a party ban. We don't allow people under the age of 25 to book last minute for a single night in a city. We increased our risk thresholds to detect high risk reservations. We've elevated the visibility of our neighbor hotline to be able to get more signals. So there's a number of things we're doing. We've even took legal action against some guests.
So, Olivia, how has Airbnb been handling these more high-risk, difficult, and maybe potentially criminal, at times, rarely, situations?
Well, the first thing that happens when a violent crime occurs inside a listing and someone reaches out to the company is that the elite, highly specialized safety team will take the call. So anytime there is something serious like a sexual assault, something involving children, a wrongful death, murder in a listing, it's transferred directly through to an elite team of agents who are trained in trauma care. And this team is really set up to try and protect the individual in crisis. And that includes spending whatever it takes to get them to safety, flying them around the world, flying family members in to support them, offering health or counselling costs in the wake of an incident. And this team is kind of set up to not only support the individual in crisis, but also to support the company's public image. Because as you said earlier, Airbnb's business model is based on the idea that strangers can trust one another. So these incidents, while they're rare, they're also potentially, significantly damaging to the brand and reputation.
So quickly, Olivia, what's your takeaway? And of course, readers can read your story for more.
I think my biggest takeaway is really the amount of vicarious trauma a lot of these agents experience, and how a company like Airbnb tries to train them as they enter the job and also support them through the work. Airbnb's established, cool down rooms for these agents to answer really harrowing calls around violent crimes.
All right, definitely a really important story to check out in Bloomberg Business Week. Our Bloomberg News reporter Olivia Carville, who covers Airbnb, thank you so much for bringing that story to us. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Coming up tomorrow, more of our interview with Coinbase co-founder Fred Ursum on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. You do not want to miss it. This is Bloomberg.